I'm afraid. I'm not afraid of what you might think I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that we are at another aha moment when nothing changes. I'm afraid that in our craving for normal, we will do what we have always done, which is sweep the issues under the rug. I'm afraid that the protests and the riots will end, that the pressure cooker will let off some of its steam and nothing will actually change. Sometimes it feels wrong for me to speak about race because it seems like I might have won the sperm lottery because my skin is white. But if white people don't speak about race, then I fear nothing will change. So let me ask you, my fellow white people, aren't you exhausted by the craziness? It's exhausting to not know if you're safe in your own home or in the streets where you live, right? Oftentimes it takes extreme situations for any human to learn and to even have understanding and compassion for the circumstances that another person lives in. So, to you, my fellow white people, let me say, if you feel like it's hard to breathe because you're so anxious and exhausted, if you feel even a little bit threatened and concerned about your country or your place in it, congratulations. You now have a few days or maybe even a few weeks of experiencing what it's like every single day for our black brothers and sisters to walk around. If you're struggling to breathe during your anxiety, imagine feeling what it's like to have a knee on your neck. God, when I saw that video, it was so upsetting to watch the life force just sort of leak out of a human being, and that the person doing it to them seems sort of nonchalant. You see, racism is systemic, but it becomes real in a single story. But for black people, in fact, all people of color, racism is an every single day way of life. They have had to normalize things that are not normal, that should never be and never be even considered to be normal. But that day when we all saw George Floyd murdered live on camera, we were all awakened from the drunken slumber of this matrix we call normal. Now, even though you and I as white people may not even begin to understand what it's like to walk around in a skin color that determines how other people will judge us or treat us, we can start a conversation around empathy and compassion and understanding. I can, from personal experience, speak of prejudice. I was 7 years old in a new school. I was looking to make new friends like most 7-year-olds are. And a few minutes into that first break, another kid came up to me and tried to beat me up because, in his words, the Jews killed our Lord. First off, I was 7. I hadn't killed anyone. And second of all, I had no idea who his Lord was. That was my first experience of anti-Semitism. It certainly wasn't my last. There were several times where I held a bag of frozen peas on my tender morsels after getting a kicking. But what I want you to understand is that was prejudice, not systemic racism. You see, my birth faith did not enter the room before I, the human, did. However, if you're black, it does. Imagine going somewhere and they, the people you are meeting, have already determined everything about you before you've even entered the room. And furthermore, it may not even be malicious. It's just systemic. You see, my mom taught me very early on that we cannot afford to be prejudiced. My friends in childhood and in life have been every race and every color. And so for me, racism is insane. But here's the thing, we, white people, have got to stop trying to change the narrative. This, for me, is such an important point. Look, I know we all I know that the spin doctors can change what is one thing into another. I'll give you an example. When Colin Kaepernick took a knee, it was about the very thing that we're talking about today. The black racism against black people that results in police brutality. But it got a spin, didn't it? You remember that? It got a spin to being about patriotism. There's nothing anti-American about taking a knee. It belongs to the Marines. And that's about as American and patriotic as you can get. But by making it about that, we allowed the black community to get gagged. And we're doing it again. We are being spun. We are being allowed by them to change. We are allowing them to change the narrative away from racial police brutality, or for that matter, systemic racism, to being about George Floyd having a criminal history, about violent riots or looting. But understand, it's not about those things. In America, having a criminal history does not make it okay to murder someone. There is something called due process in a democratic system, particularly in America. Furthermore, violent riots and lootings are symptoms of the problems that we have not been facing. Look, I don't agree with looting. It's terrible. Innocent people lose their goods and their property. But when people speak and we don't bother to listen, when they scream and cry and it falls on deaf ears, then the shame and the rage that they have been force-fed to swallow must eventually be violently vomited back out into the society that has force-fed it to those people. Force-fed them what is an emotional, mental, and even soulful poison that they're less than. Black people, in fact, all people of color, have been looted of everything that matters. The US and most Western countries were built on the exploitation and occupational segregation of people of color. They were originally robbed of their lands, their autonomy, their faith, and then their rights. Today, the rights of black and non-white people are looted through gerrymandering and the criminal justice system that disproportionately imprisons people of color for the same things that white people get a slap on the wrist for. There has been systemic looting of black people for as long as there's been in America, and it's done through racism. My fear is not that the protests will accelerate, but rather those in power will find a way to spin it into something else that will allow it to be swept under a 20-story high rug until once again it explodes. You see, this is not new. Some of you are old enough to remember the 1992 LA riots that were a result of police brutality on Rodney King. And that's just one example. We must not allow them to change the story. We must not become silent every time our black brothers and sisters scream out for help. What happened to George Floyd, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, and thousands of others hurts my heart and my soul. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Racism is insane because we are judging another human being about something they had no choice in. The melanin levels in their skin, the color of their skin. So let me be clear. This is not a time for faux spirituality. You're not going to be able to kumbaya your way out of this. Now is the time for action. The rules of how we've operated no longer work. The rules have given us leaders driven by power and greed. And if we are going to give power to a leader, that leader must use that power for all. So despite the spin, this is not a black and white or even a black and blue issue. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is a systemic issue. This is a humanities issue. This is a leadership issue. This is about leadership that is dysfunctional, divisive, and racist. And dear white people, it is our responsibility to change it. We have been too passive because it served us. We have waited for them, those people in power, to change the system. When we must, as Gandhi said, we must be the change we want to see. But here's the hard truth. If we, white people, allow them to spin this into what it is not, if we don't take action, nothing will change. So stay curious, my friends, stay curious about how your passivity, about our passivity, is keeping racism alive. I call on my white brothers and sisters to support everyone of color because we are all the same color under the skin. I love you all. I believe in you all. And I believe more than anything that we can change the world. We just got to stop looking to the others to make it right.